I'm Justin Laidlaw.
And I'm Chris Vidiello.
And this is Sights on the City with Clarion Content. Today we're talking with Councilman Eddie Davis. Pivot a little bit, Chris. I know you wanted to talk about development, and within the realm of development with regards to business, one thing that helps businesses grow is real estate opportunities, places where whether it's food or retail, space that if someone had an idea that they felt like they could bring that idea and afford the opportunity to get into some of these spaces, whether it's downtown or elsewhere. But it doesn't seem like at the moment Durham has too much real estate opportunity for small business. And we're kind of, with growth comes some pitfalls for small business, and that seems to be one of them. How do we help bring attention to the city, but then also foster the small business community with regards to development here in town?
Well, you're exactly right. We seem to be not catering to, but we certainly have taken advantage of the opportunities and the proposals that have been put forth by large-scale developments that have come many times from outside of North Carolina. And that's great. But we also ought to be able to come up with some ways where we can actually nurture some of the people who have good ideas about small businesses. And we ought to be able to see if we can deal with trying to find the capital that young people and other people need to try to develop these businesses. I think there are some small commercial ventures that might be able to be dealt with in some of the less thriving areas right now that would give them the opportunity to try to do some of that work that would make Durham proud of all of its communities in terms of the opportunities. The mayor has put forth the poverty reduction initiative, and we certainly are trying to work there. But one of the best ways to reduce poverty is to try to put people in positions where they can make more money, to be able to put together business opportunities for people to come together so that they can thrive themselves. And the other thing that I'm very interested in is the business opportunities for people who have made mistakes with their early lives and who are looking for second chances, being able to, if they can't get a job because people look at their record and make some assumptions about where they were and think maybe they might follow in those footsteps. If people really are trying to change their life patterns, maybe business is the way that they can go. If they can't get into working for someone else, maybe you can put together a plan to work for yourselves, and in doing so, being able to provide a wonderful service to the communities around Durham.
I know you've been in Durham since 1980. I've been in Durham since 1994, and we both remember downtown when it was a ghost town. When I moved here, I mean, I know that like 70%, and that might even be a low number, of downtown was unoccupied. And then I remember, I mean, there were sort of iterative attempts to try to get stuff going, but one of the huge impediments was that building owners were just owning these buildings because it was cheap to own them, and they could just wait for something to happen, and hopefully then they could sell it. It was just an investment. They had no intention to develop it. And I remember that there was a property revaluation that really kind of helped spur a lot of these building owners. Suddenly they were like, I don't want to pay taxes on this anymore because the value has gone up. I want to move this property, and developers could then come in and make something happen. We're on the verge of another revaluation in Durham, 2016.
That's right.
It's happening. Does the city look at that as a way of looking at underdeveloped, undeveloped, low occupancy, high abandoned building parts of town as a way of sort of spurring those properties back into play, back into life?
Well, we certainly are involved with it, although that's mostly the bailiwick of the county commissioners.
Okay.
Because the county deals with the tax issue, and they collect the taxes that people pay for the city. But that point you're making is a very, very valuable one, and it needs to be the kind of collective conversation with the county commissioners and the city council and the broader community to see if there cannot be a way that we can do just what you're talking about, seeing if there are ways that we can spur the kind of development that we want to see here in downtown and also in other parts of the city. Here again, that's the same kind of issue. It presents itself down that Fayetteville Street corridor. Lots of the people who own the houses that we see boarded up are waiting to cash in from North Carolina Central along the way, and what we're hoping is that we can maybe convince them to do some things to try to make those buildings a little more attractive, to try to spur the commercial as well as the residential growth that we want to see in a way that would make it attractive and conducive to the kinds of business opportunities that we've been talking about. I just see such wonderful opportunities for the spur that's come from downtown to move out almost like an octopus in lots of different ways, so that we can take advantage of the growth that Durham needs.
That freeway is just awful, isn't it? I mean, we have some of these sort of geographic and architectural impediments. We got the freeway that just cuts off that corridor from downtown.
Sure.
The train tracks. I know there's been conversation about what to do about the train tracks through downtown. Although people seem to be walking across them to get to DPAC in great numbers. And then we have sort of. There's been a lot of talk recently about the police station relocation and the health building along Main Street between downtown and the Golden Belt District. And although that's only recently been sort of renamed the Golden Belt District, how are these changes that drop in the city's lap, or are these changes that have a lot of discussion in council, among the council people about just what kinds of effects just the city layout, just the fabric of life in the city have in terms of isolating areas and connecting areas?
Well, we've had a great deal of discussion, particularly around the police station, because people talked about how we had this district. If you look at the big social services building and then the police the location right down the street from that, we have this long pathway of area where there's not much things other than going to those governmental services area. Golden Belt is a little bit different down the road, but we need to have the buildings. Hopefully we'll be able to have some commercial ventures along the way that can come in and intercept some of the governmental buildings along the way. What we really need is to really thrive is to have kind of combinations of governmental buildings and commercial buildings and residential buildings, so that we end up having more neighborhoods that can thrive, that the people can live there, they can shop there, they can even deal with governmental services along the way. And that's something that we have not, during my term on the council, necessarily had the kind of integrated conversation with the county commissioners as to how that is happening. Now, lots of things may happen that I'm not aware of, but I don't think that we see the ultimate result that I would like to see along the way when it comes to those kinds of things. Yeah.
Well, I'm sort of speaking to the viewers of this. I mean, what can citizens do to be a part of that conversation? I mean, certainly, Justin and I know that we end up having these conversations walking down the street, sitting at a restaurant table or something. It's just like several a day, just about, gosh, I wish this was happening and this should happen. And there's a lot of, it seems like a lot of energy just among citizens, but we don't always know how to activate that. What person in a position of authority we need to interact with to talk about ideas and to get something happening.
Well,
in the
I think
world.
that that's the role of your elected leaders, and I think we are moving toward trying to have more conversations about people, not always conversations that deal with problems necessarily like we've had recently about police and community relations, and that's certainly something that ought to be ongoing. But we ought to have continuing conversations that will allow for citizens to talk to elected officials and to do some long-range planning to look at how we can make this a much more important city in the minds of the people who actually live here. The conversations that we have among small groups of people is a good process, but we need to have large-scale kinds of discussion of issues, sometimes disagreements as to how we're going to deal with things. But we ought to be having many more conversations about how Durham will look 50 years down the road. And people say 50 years, that's a long time, but it can happen real quickly. There are a lot of people in Durham right now who remember the 60s. We were talking earlier about clubs and other kinds of nightlife activities. Lots of people remember those things, and they'll remember what Durham was like in 2015 when we look back over at down the road. So we've got some work to do to try to make this the kind of thriving community we all want it to be. So we've got to have more conversations among people, and more importantly, among people who might not normally talk to each other. We still are divided by race and class and gender and those kind of things, but we ought to be able to bridge those gaps here so that we don't end up in our conversations having the same kind of barriers that you just talked about in terms of the physical features of the city. So there ought not be a dividing line like the expressway when it comes to our conversation. So we got more to do.
How would, along those lines, how do we get sort of ahead of some of the issues that we're having, as opposed to being reactive, which I think a lot of citizens feel like that's their only option? How can we be more proactive in terms of conversations that we're having about development, crime, education, any of the concerns that we might have?
Well, I think here again, it just needs to be a purposeful kind of setting that we create. We've had some conversations recently about police and community. We have another one coming up about the education, and another one about second chances. But we also ought to be able to, once we have these conversations, engage in smaller conversations and to have people to write about. The Clarion content had a wonderful critique of the conversation that we had. And that kind of thing, people who weren't able to be at the event might have been able to read about it in your publication. So I just see so many ways that we can just capitalize on the kind of energy that comes from people of all walks of life who can see Durham and really try to work together to make it become the kind of community that we all want it to be. And to go back to your point, not just wait until there's a crisis. Let's be proactive rather than reactive. One of the reasons that we had this first conversation, because we saw what had gone on in Ferguson, we saw what had gone on in Baltimore, we were anticipating what might happen in Charlotte, and to be able to have the kind of conversations now rather than waiting until something happens that we don't want to see happen and then try to hurriedly come together to try to talk about things that we should have been talking about all the time. So that's the kind of vision that I'm hoping that we can develop for the city.
Conversation is the key, obviously. Then this has been a great conversation. Councilman Eddie Davis, thank you so much for talking with Justin Laidlaw, Chris Vitiello on Clarion content and on sites on the city.
Well, thank you so much. I look forward to having continued conversation with you all also.
Excellent.